music setting English words, the best-known piece and the best-loved is surely Handel's Messiah. Here in Westminster Abbey, the oratorio is performed much as Handel would have heard it, with a choir smaller than is usual today. The work was not immediately well received in its own time. The story of its gradual acceptance is closely bound up with changes in mid-18th century English society. When Handel wrote Messiah in 1741, this statue of him was already on display in a public place, an unprecedented honor for a living composer. His first works in London had been mainly Italian opera, regarded by many here with the deepest suspicion. But more recently, in his oratorios, he was setting English texts, which in some cases were morally uplifting, and in others verged on the downright jingoistic. With either mood, a new middle-class audience felt an instinctive sympathy. London at this time was a place of increasing prosperity and confidence. With a developing British Empire overseas, London's merchants were discovering new sources of wealth, which would enable them to enjoy the pleasures of life previously reserved for a much smaller aristocracy. But the streets of London, like those of any great city, contained also a very different class of people. The poor, as the Bible says, you have always with you. Who was to comfort them? The answer was charity. Hospitals, asylums, schools were being built, but through the generosity of private people rather than by the state. Charity was less in evidence, perhaps, when a visit to marvel at the poor lunatics in Bedlam became part of the fashionable circuit. The history of Handel's Messiah is intimately connected with that of one particular charity, the Foundling Hospital. The Foundling Hospital was established in 1739 by Thomas Coram, a self-made man. He was a retired sea captain. At this time, babies born to the poorest mothers would often be abandoned in the street, to be found or to die. Coram established a hospital where women could bring the infants they were unable to look after. Here they would be housed, clothed, fed, and eventually given a trade. The Foundling Hospital was besieged every morning. There were never enough places. If she was lucky, a mother would never see her child again. And these tragic little mementos would be all that the children would ever know of their mothers. Captain Coram enlisted the help of ladies of nobility and distinction to raise money for the venture, and also persuaded painters like Hogarth, who did this portrait of him, to lend or give pictures for exhibition in the hospital. In an age before public art galleries, people would be enticed in to see the pictures and could then be cajoled into giving money. This painting, by Hogarth himself, is directly relevant to the work of the hospital. It shows a biblical foundling, Moses, who had some time before been discovered in the bulrushes and is now being taken in by the Pharaoh's daughter, looking very much like a welcoming English lady with only a sphinx and a crocodile to link her to the Nile. Together with Hogarth, the other famous man much involved with the foundling hospital was Handel. This page of the hospital minutes shows the accounts of a fundraising performance of Messiah given by Handel here in 1754. It lists all the musicians who performed, together with the amounts paid to them, mainly in shillings. Performances of Messiah here became annual and very fashionable events. And if in the long run they helped to put the foundling hospital on the map, at the start it had been very much the other way around, with the hospital helping the reputation of Handel's great oratorio. He wrote it in 1741 for a charity in Dublin, and it was well received there, but its first performance in London, 2 years later, had been highly controversial, for reasons connected not with the music, but with the words. The text is mainly from the Old and New Testaments, God's words, but in a tradition now well established for Handel's English oratorios, the performance was in a theatre, Covent Garden. The problem was well put in a letter to a newspaper. An oratorio, pronounced the writer, either is an act of religion or it is not. Well, you couldn't fault him on that. But then, if it is an act of religion, it is improper to perform it in a theatre. But if it is only entertainment, then it profanes God's name and word to involve him in such frivolities. Performing the work at the Foundling Hospital neatly answered both objections. This was not a sacred place, yet it served a charitable purpose for which God's own words were surely appropriate. Handel's Messiah, wrote Charles Burney, fed the hungry, clothed the naked, and enriched succeeding managers of oratorio more than any single production in this or any other country. Handel was above all a dramatic composer, so he was naturally attracted to the theatrical qualities of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, from which most oratorio texts were drawn. The epic scale of the events, the confrontation between good and evil, the lurid fates of the protagonists. Handel's genius was attuned to capture the drama of the moment when the writing appears on the wall at Belshazzar's feast, or to depict in Jephthah the agony of a father committed to sacrificing his daughter to God. Handel wrote quickly. Messiah in 1741 had taken just over 3 weeks. His next work he completed in the following 6. It was Samson, following the biblical story but with words from Milton, and so less controversial. It was Samson as warrior, rather than lover, that the audience of that time particularly relished. Samson had its London premiere at Covent Garden in the same season as Messiah. Unlike Messiah, it was an immediate success. In this air, a revived Samson, comparing himself to the newly risen sun, strides out to square his account with the Philistines.